Hello and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a podcast that wants to flatten the curve. And how are you, Rob?
Yeah, I've been better, but I'm getting through it. How are you?
Yeah, I think there's probably a bit of that for all of us this week. We've been told off by Boris, and we're all sat inside now. I suppose we're probably going to expand on that over the next half hour to an hour, depending on how long we go on for. This is going to be a bit of a different episode. We're not going to have headlines. I think we're just going to kind of talk about what's going on, the response, and also kind of maybe throw in some of our own anecdotes about how it's been, because I think everyone will know what we're alluding to already with the current pandemic that's going on. So did you want to start anywhere in particular?
I guess we should start at home, I imagine. Just the fact that, we are in lockdown along with a lot of the rest of the world. I believe India went on lockdown today or yesterday. Puts 1.3 billion people in lockdown. I think there was a stat that about, was it like 1/7 of the world or something now is under lockdown, and it's only growing, and it's mad for something.
I thought it was a quarter at this point.
A quarter.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. Adding up to the countries, yeah, that makes sense. It seems mad that something we were sort of fleetingly talking about 2 weeks ago has grown into such a worldwide crisis that's reaching far and wide. And for the meantime, it shows no sign of stopping. Although there are like shoots of hope from places like China, Japan, South Korea that seem to have managed their situation far better than we have here in Europe. That might be something to discuss later in the podcast. Actually, the differing responses and how they've gone all over the world. I think the big warning sign for all of us is what's happened in Italy. A lot of people were saying that Italy is 2 weeks ahead of us. And although over the past few days, I think the death toll had fallen slightly, it had another spike this morning. So fingers crossed they are getting under that control. But what's clear is what's needed at the moment is this big lockdown that we've had at the moment. I think the details of which are changing day by day, I would say, like who's allowed to go outside and what isn't. I know that they've changed in Italy as time has gone on. But at the moment, I think you're now only allowed to go outside your house for one bit of exercise a day, and if you're going to like a pharmacy or a grocery store, or if you've got to go to a key job in which you cannot work.
Yeah, I think, we won't dwell on it too much on the basis that, as you say, things are constantly changing. I think the advice that came out on Monday was, stay home if you can, as you say, those four kind of key things. But there's been a bit of clarifying back and forth because, firstly, what counts as a key worker? There was a very good Onion article, which is social influencers shocked to find out they don't count as key workers. I've seen various things going back and forth. And it also depends on what your bosses say and how they implement stuff. So I know that, last week we all went to work from home at the company I work for. But some stuff still needs to be done at the factory. So there will be there are people working in the factory who can safely stay more than 2 meters away from people. And with large scale machinery and stuff like that, it's often not that hard. Whereas there was no point in all the people going into the office who normally go into the office. And I think one of the things that will be interesting to see as fallout from this is there's lots of offices that have kind of clung to the you have to come in from 9 to 5 strategy, as mostly IT-based companies or IT workers have started to move to working from home. And I've seen different industries throughout my career, and I would not be surprised if this, one of the weird things, like 5 years on, we're going to be like, oh, that's what broke kind of the office industry, as it were. Not. I don't mean companies closing down, which obviously could be a concern. I mean that you only need like 20% of your people in the office, and most people can work from home. And I think that's probably something like that will be something we'll see from this. And There's a photo that I'll try and find to put in the show notes of like the cabinet having their meeting over Zoom, and I think everyone this week who works for a company who didn't already have some kind of remote presence software set up has suddenly found themselves using Zoom for 40 minutes. The upside of which, of course, is that meetings have to end after 40 minutes. It's amazing how much more productive they are. You can go back to playing with the cats, baking bread at home, whatever it is you're doing around your work.
Precisely. And have you played with the virtual background function that they've got in Zoom?
No, because I don't have a green screen, and it said you don't have a green screen, so you can't use it. And I was like, oh, because the one in Skype works for me, but yeah.
You don't need a green screen. I haven't got a green screen, and it's working, well, marginally okay for me with a bit of light coming in through the back door as I work from home. But yeah, you can be anywhere you want in the world. I think my boss is in the space station at the moment while I'm in the American office with Stanley behind me, trying my best gym look into the camera. Yeah, no, it's... I think you're right there with the different change to like it might break the old 9 to 5 working habits. I remember when I used to work in my old office, it was kind of said that, you need to be in from 9 to 5 because these are the core hours and this is when business gets done. But now there's no commute. Everybody's kind of logging on at 8. Some people are going, some people are taking a longer lunch break and working later. A more flexible way of working within a team seems to be working, well, this is purely anecdotal, but it's working quite well for us at the moment. So, yeah, if there's any, little things that could come out at the end of this, I think we're going to see quite a few social changes when we get through this. But I think one of those big ones could be the end of the traditional 9 to 5.
Yeah, and I just want to add on that I don't know if it's your impression, but I always feel like I get more done when I work from home. I don't know how often, I don't know if you're just adjusting to it or if you've done a fair bit before, but when I think once I got into the work from home lifestyle of, after the first few days in my first job where I did a lot of work from home, once I'd done that for a while, I kind of got into the groove and I was like, well, the only thing that matters is your output, which, for coding is very easy to see the kind of work someone's doing that way. And it becomes part of your life that you log on earlier. And you probably end up working a bit later because, you don't have to run to catch the train and all the other things that happen when you're in a big office. So I definitely think there's some upsides. Obviously, there's downsides as well. I mean, there's lots of advice going around at the moment of how to deal with being in lockdown, which is a bit different to just working from home. Like, I suppose we can touch on the police powers and everything, but this isn't a jolly holiday, everyone. You've still got to keep working if you're working from home, and it's also, suddenly you're stuck in a house with your housemates or your spouse or whoever, your children, and you have to come up with new systems of working. There's a lot of podcasters I listen to who are kind of professional podcasters, and they have a good amount of advice because obviously they've been doing this for like 5-10 years because they just work out of their home office or whatever. There's a lot of you have to set rules and so on. But I think it'll be interesting to see if this causes a lot of people to adapt how they work going forwards. Yeah, there you go, some business jargon thrown in, going forwards.
Yeah. I think it's at least a proof of concept, isn't it? Like, some people would be worried about the work from home scenario, and I know that when I've personally worked from home for like a day or two, it like you say, it felt like a bit like a jolly holiday, or I was slacking off, or, my productivity was, there or thereabouts, but I was working off a tiny laptop screen. Now I've got 2 screens to do my work, and I'm set up on a desk, and I've like got a little home office because I know I'm in it for the long haul. My productivity's gone, way up. So, little bits and bobs, pieces going on.
So it's kind of an extended intro, I suppose, us talking about how it's affected us directly. I have uploaded a photo that I'll throw in the show notes of the socially distant queue into Waitrose from lunchtime today. And people were pretty generally quite good. The interesting thing is I find that, like, with the social distancing thing, that people are very good when they're told to stand in a queue and stuff like that, but, like, we got in there was plenty of food because there's only a certain amount of people allowed in at a time and everyone's trying to limit when they go out to buy stuff. I mean, this was our first shop for like 5 days at this point. The thing that's weird is, like, you go somewhere, like, you're fine, and most people are doing a good job of getting out of the way and being aware of their space and what they're taking up. There's like, it only takes 1 or 2 people who aren't really paying attention, and suddenly you're like, oh, there's a lot of people very close together here, and it's this kind of weird, kind of social feeling that you didn't have before. And I think that's where it really shows up. Like driving around, like driving from your house to the shop doesn't seem too strange at the moment. It's not like the streets are completely empty because people are still having to go to essential jobs. Yeah, when you kind of get into that position where you're like, oh, there's something weird here because we know we're all supposed to keep a bit of space. It's a bit interesting. But yeah, shall we kind of go through the response that we've had as a country? Because I mean, we can touch on other countries as examples, I suppose, to compare to. But it's like if you'd said 2 weeks ago we would be on lockdown now, if we'd said it in the last episode, I don't think anyone would have believed us.
No, but it has been. I feel like it's been a slow trickle, and I know that there's been a pressure on Boris Johnson where it almost felt, for me at least, like a relief when the call finally came on, when was it? Was it Monday night that we finally got the call that said that we would be going into a full lockdown? There were calls before that for more social distancing and those people in vulnerable groups to sort of shield themselves as well. And that came about like a week earlier, but there were still reports, like in the news, of crowded marketplaces. Even at the weekend, even after people had been called to socially distance themselves, there was a rush of people to national parks, and like Snowdonia was busier than it had ever been, and it was hard to even walk up it by social distancing because so many people had decided to get out of the city and go to the countryside. The countryside was all full up. So we've had that call, that slow creep. We've had the move away from, jobs and people realizing that they have to stay at home for their jobs, or maybe that their jobs won't be available at all, because one of the other effects that the virus is having is that it was having a big impact on the economy. The new chancellor was suddenly had to be put to the test and brought in a massive package of spending measures to help get people through this period of time. There is still some controversy about that. I think particularly over people who are self-employed, what support that they'll get at the moment. I know that one anecdotally at least, that one of my friends who works in the music industry and is self-employed just doesn't know what he's going to do at the moment, doesn't know where he can get the support because it wasn't there before. And now I think it's down to like £94 a week, whereas in other professions the government would agree to pay 80%, I believe, of your salary if you were forced into self-isolation with the virus. So, yeah, there's been a slow trickle, a slow creep until finally, I think, I don't know what it was that, the straw that broke the camel's back on this one. There does seem to have been a change in the government's thinking from a certain report that came out that had a look at, what would happen if we did different effects, if we only closed schools, or if we only, or if we went into full lockdown, and the potential that would have of, making sure we reduced the strain on the NHS of people that may have to go to hospital. The effect of doing nothing seemed just out of the question, and any hope that Britain would develop a herd immunity and that would help everybody get back seemed to be blown out of the water. So as soon as those numbers came through, I believe that the government changed tack pretty quickly, and that's how we've ended up in the situation that we're in, essentially.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think we're going to spend too much on the science here, but I think the herd immunity strategy was a bold one, in that it was a very risky strategy. And I don't know how much you know about herd immunity for, say, measles, where we're all vaccinated as children, or we should be. But now I think it's something like the measles. As I'm sure you're aware, that at some point there was some controversy about the MMR vaccine. It's all unfounded scientifically, but it means there's now an anti-vax movement, and that has led to reductions in kind of in the herd immunity down to about 96%, I think it is, as opposed to near 100%. And the thing is, it only takes that few percentage to drop down for you suddenly to have outbreaks of things like measles. And so, bearing in mind at the moment, people think that, say, 80% of COVID-19 cases are asymptomatic, i.e. you might not know you have anything worse than a cold. And then it's that kind of 20% of more severe cases, which can lead to hospitalisation, or at least having a very rough few days at home where you're self-isolating. that means, to get up to 98% of people having a natural immunity does require a lot of people who are vulnerable taking the hit on that. And I don't think that was 100% thought through when it was first proposed, if I'm honest. And then, then the upshot of that is that suddenly there was this kind of change. But I think what Boris has tried to do is it's been piecemeal. So it's like one rule comes in, start broadcasting every day, and each day we were adjusting to a new change, which allows you to adjust over a week or two to quite an extreme case from what you were in. I don't think if he'd said lockdown day one, people would have. I think there'd been more people in the street causing a fuss.
Yeah,
and the police would have had to use more powers to limit and curtail people. But also, there's this kind of idea that, try and be sensible. And it does feel a bit like being told off, It's like, well, we told you can go outside, but you've all gone up Snowdon and infected each other, so you're grounded. You're staying inside now. And I think that I feel like there's a bit of it's a political look he's going for, which is like, I've tried to be as lenient as possible, and not force you into this, but here's where we are because you have not listened to the advice.
Yeah, precisely. And I think that I was reading online, I don't know if this is the case, this is, Boris Johnson is a prime minister who's always liked to be liked. He wants to be popular, and these measures he knows will most likely make him not popular, or at least if he'd brought them in right at the start. There's certainly be a change in narrative amongst a lot of commentators from, oh, this is nothing to worry about, to, oh my goodness, this is serious. A good example of that is the Washington Post posted a video on Twitter about how Fox News had changed its coverage. We'll touch on America later, but that was one where they really were going, this is an overblown thing that the Democrats are using to stop President Trump, to all of a sudden a week ago saying, no, this is really serious. You've got to take it seriously, or there could be serious repercussions. I'm not saying that Boris Johnson has been not taking it seriously from the start, but as you said, if he'd done it from day one, I think he would have been far more unpopular. I know on Friday, was it, when they shut the pubs, there was kind of, some people went, thank goodness, that's a sensible decision, but equally I saw on lots of social media feeds people going out for one last hurrah, and I almost felt like screaming at my phone, like going, no, that is literally not the point of, you shouldn't all be flocking to the pubs because they're going to close. He's telling you shouldn't be going to these places at all.
I mean, it happened to me, so I was traveling for work. I was not traveling outside of the country. I think we'd already, convinced work that should not be happening. I mean, having business in China and stuff like that means we'd already seen shut down on the routes we would have been taking anyway. So it was, it was kind of a response because of that. But I was in the factory on a whatever day it was. I think it was a Tuesday, and I had arranged to meet up with a friend for dinner. And that news kind of broke, and I was, I missed the kind of the news that was like, if I'd turned up to the pub and it had been entirely closed, obviously I would have turned away, but I turned up and because it was a pub hotel, it was still open at that time. And so I went in, and my friend and I had dinner and a drink. And then the next day it's like, no more pubs. So, it's been interesting. And I think when that first thing happened, it was a bit more of a shock. Not trying to 100% absolve myself. I probably shouldn't have gone to the pub, but it didn't have many people in it. And I had to eat that evening, and other stuff hadn't really closed down. I think there's a bit of a difference if people were going out clubbing after they were told everything's going to shut that night, which I heard some people doing. But then, it's interesting. So, like, on the Sunday, that weekend where they were like, it's Mothering Sunday, don't go see your parents because they're quite old, and all these other things. 1.5 million people told to stay at home because they were more vulnerable, and there was like a text, I believe, went out, and also letters. You might be able to say more to that since you do some work with the NHS, so you might have be more aware of that. But So that was happening, but there was still the kind of you should go out. Like, I can't remember his exact wording, but it was along the lines of you should go out and enjoy the fresh air and stuff like this. And you saw some there's a park in London near where a friend lives, and it has a market on Sundays, and it was properly rammed. Everyone ignoring social distancing rules. On the flip side, further out where we are, we went to Richmond Park. We had a nice long walk. And it was quite easy to stay away from people, and I think most people were trying to, at least. Like, it was kind of, but again, like, if you're funneled into a small inner city park, it's a lot harder to keep those rules up. So, but then even as we were leaving, we thought we'd done something wrong because we saw the police closing the gates, but they were closing driving traffic, presumably to limit people coming from further away than walking distance. Yeah. So we were like, once we looked that up and we were like, okay, it's not closed, we haven't done anything wrong. We were like, but it it's amazing how that suddenly changes. Like, a few weeks ago, if we'd seen the police closing the park, we'd have worried it was, someone like an attack or something. And now it's part of daily life.
Yeah. And that's it, isn't it? It's adjusting to the new daily life. I know I've been working from home for a week now, and basically haven't really gone out at all over the weekend. Only other I went to work Monday, Tuesday last week, and that was it. That was me in there. And it's just adjusting to a new routine, trying to make like you said, there's lots of different living situations. I'm lucky that I still live in a town. There's people around, but at least I'm in the countryside and I have access to a garden. So God's cruel joke is that the weather's suddenly turned and become marvelous, hasn't it? Just as right before this, it was horrible. It never stopped raining. Now it's super sunny. So at least I get a bit of time out in the garden and try and spend my lunchtimes out in the sun if I can. But yeah, it's a big adjustment, and one that we might be living with for a while. Nobody can really say how long it's going to go on for, this thing. I think that's one thing that's clear. China is saying that it's returning to normal, but that is a new normal. I was just reading an article on the BBC that said there were, places in the northern districts where if you travel by public transport, you scan in like a QR code, and your temperature is taken. So if it's later revealed that you had the virus, your movements can be tracked essentially, and can be said like if you have a risk of the virus or not. In a lot of countries, particularly in South Asia, such as China, South Korea, and Japan, their big success with limiting the impact of the virus has been tracking, testing, and then isolating those that are vulnerable. And that might be something that's a question over the government's strategy, particularly their access to tests. I know the government has said that they are accessing far more tests and home swabbing kits that might be coming around soon. Once again, this is a podcast that's going out later, so check the regular news for what's actually happening out there. But it does appear that this mantra of just keep testing and know if you have the virus and know what to do does help to keep a lot more people safe. And it's kind of what the lockdown is about. We have to go into a lockdown if we haven't tested everybody in the country, or if we can't test that many people, because you have to sort of assume the worst to make sure that you can plan for the future.
There's a lot of anecdotal stuff going in here. You have to check the CDC, the WHO, and the NHS websites for actual information. There's scientific papers out there you can read as well. I'll definitely throw that Imperial study into the show notes, and maybe a few others. But I mean, I know people who've said to me, "Oh, well, in the middle of February, I felt really awful and rough," and like in retrospect, they're like, maybe I had some mild symptoms, and it's very. I mean, and if those people haven't been tested, you don't know then if they had it at all, and that's what's really difficult with this, especially with the slow. So the slow progression. So it's 5 to 11 days, I think, is the general span from meeting someone with the virus and contracting it. During which time, you could be even on some of my longest work trips would be at most 2 weeks abroad. So I could have, you could have met someone abroad, you then come back and you wouldn't know before you'd left a country, and that's why it's so easy to spread it, because it's not like with other things where it's generally more obvious when you get it. You can basically be walking around shedding it, which is a term for basically the virus being spread, and not know that you're infected at that point. So that's why it's been so problematic. Again, check against anything a better source, but I believe there's another podcast I'll reference that has some interviews with experts that was very good. I listened to earlier in the week. But I believe it's the actual death rate from this is lower, but the problem is obviously it's infecting so many more people. So like when we were very worried about SARS, which I think would have been when we were both at school, I remember people being very worried about that, like adults, but it kind of only filtered through to me as a kid just about, and I was like, oh, well, I'm sure it's fine. And I think also that's the problem here, that these kind of things, we've heard about them in the past, and then they have just been fine. So I think that's probably part of the reason the reaction was a bit slow from the average person, because it didn't feel like our problem for quite a long time. It felt like someone else's problem, which often is the way with how news articles are kind of reported. I mean, over here at least, we haven't had, well, let's focus on Donald Trump for a second, calling it the Chinese virus and other things that are just wrong and atrocious. But yeah, that kind of spread of information has been, I think people have been a bit slow on the uptake that it was a real problem here. And then suddenly it's when you're like, no, look at Italy. We could be that in 14 days. And, we're kind of tracking, we're basically 14 days behind on infection rate. I think our death rate isn't as bad, if I'm correct. But again, please double check the numbers. I'm not an expert on this at all. But yeah, I mean, there are some discussions about, the north of Italy. Italy has more social gatherings with a whole range of age ranges, and they also have a slightly older population on average, I think, than we do. So there may be some differences there in who's more susceptible, but still, the number of cases seems to be tracking very closely, with about a 14-day delay. So there's a reason the government is suddenly like, if in 14 days we were going to be reporting those numbers, then it's no wonder the government suddenly changed tack along with those projections from Imperial. I've kind of got a bit lost here with going around a bit in circles.
Let's touch on Trump then, as you mentioned him. And I mentioned last week that it was a unique problem that Trump wasn't really able to deal with, and I was curious about how he would use his usual counterpunching skills to come out against it. One thing that he has done is called it, as you said, the Chinese virus, and kind of turn that into another culture war point where some people are arguing it's fine to call it the Chinese virus, they started it, and putting a lot of blame on China, while other people are trying to say, no, it's just a virus, it could have started anywhere. Do you still blame Spain for the Spanish flu, etc., etc.? And that's one of those points that just seems, I mean, at the moment it's quite like exhausting to think that would even be a point you would bring up, but Trump seems determined to do so, and you see it in some countries that there is a war of words around the virus that plays out the old political conflict. So I believe in Iran and in China, the rumor is that this virus was released by America within those countries. That's what's caused it, so they can pin the blame on their traditional enemy, or bogeyman, which is America in those countries, and then America is just doing the same by blaming China, essentially. It's an odd way to deal with this, and, guess what? The virus don't care. What you call it, it's still going to do its business. But yeah, that's at least one way in which Trump has tried to counterpunch his way out of this. Trump's messaging, I think, has been quite irresponsible. I know that he said that he would, the country would be back open for business by Easter, which by a lot of people's predictions seems quite ambitious and
I mean, given the Vatican has just cancelled Easter.
Yes. Good point. He's going to struggle to keep up with that one. Yeah, and Trump's also sort of touted cures or hopes for a cure. Talking about drugs from and sharing news stories that said, oh, we trialed this drug and it worked fantastically. Although when you actually go ahead and read the article that Trump shared himself, it goes to say this is anecdotal and doesn't really stand up to any pure scientific reasoning. So it's probably not going to be the surefire answer that you've hoped for. Trump seems to be walking a fine line of trying to give the American people hope and comfort, while also he has to also bear the bad news, or do the stuff that Boris Johnson is actually doing at the moment, which is Boris is being more realistic about the situation, I feel, at least. That's one thing. Whatever you think of Boris Johnson before this, I at least believe that he has been honest with the British people about the potential impact this virus may have.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, because it's interesting looking at approval ratings all over the place. So in America, there's a whole political response that their bill has been going to the Senate. You have the Democrats trying to put through funding for things and other things going on, and it's very, very political. And you do wonder what this would have been like if we hadn't had the general election and we hadn't had a big Tory majority. You'd have hoped that all the parties would have come together to deal with it, but it would have been a very interesting, alternate history here. What would have happened if votes were going one way or the other in Parliament. Or maybe we can touch on the bill that's just come in before Parliament is closed today later. But I think one thing I've heard multiple people saying, and I've said it myself, is, whatever you may feel about Boris Johnson himself and his tactics he's used up to now, he has done a very good job of being like, this is a crisis, we're doing this. Maybe some of his messaging could have been better, but and there's as we discussed, there's the whole maybe we should have responded a bit faster. But it's a far cry from the kind of stuff Trump is doing, and at least it means it does give you some hope that in an actual crisis things can be different, and it's also completely thrown any mention of Brexit kind of out the water.
Yes, I feel that if we want to briefly touch on Brexit, which we always do in this podcast, so let's do at least once. I know that Boris had said that he hoped to get the trade talks done by the end of the year. I would say that's practically impossible now, and I think both parties would probably resolve to say that, mutually agree that, yes, circumstances have changed to the effect that it might be unrealistic to get Brexit negotiations done by the end of the year, and that people tend to have a few more pressing things on their mind at the moment. I saw a lot of people when the pubs closed, just people just saying, "God, I miss Brexit." When that
in 2 weeks we've gone from we don't want any more Brexit to we miss Brexit. So
yeah. If you want to briefly touch on the bill, I don't know much about the ins and outs of it. All I do know is I know that Robert Peston was talking about it and saying that it is probably one of the most far-reaching bills that we've ever had, and gives the government power that it probably hasn't had since World War II. The effect of what it can do, that the fines it can impose on people, and the amount of control the government now has over various aspects of our lives. I talked about the Chancellor of the Exchequer's promise to sort of like start paying 80% of people's wages as well, which is kind of nationalisation, not really, but it's a huge bit of state aid. I think if you told anybody during our general election campaign that within the next 6 months the Conservatives would be offering that sort of money to the general electorate and be taking on a lot of extra debt as a consequence, people would have laughed you out the room. People would have. It is an amazing, and I suppose that's what I mean. Like, in the event of a crisis, and you can quibble about timings and whether it's enough, and people always will, because that's how political commentary works. But it was surprising to see a Conservative Chancellor get up and be like, so I think it was the phrase "no limit" on one of the things he was offering, which I can't remember which one that was. It may have been the 80%. But basically, in order to stop people just being fired willy-nilly, and I have friends on Facebook who have gone through that. There were people who were losing their job being told there's no point in coming in tomorrow, hours before that announcement. So it didn't. It could have come sooner for some people. So obviously, people who've lost their jobs. That's terrible.
there's a lot going on there. I mean, I think Weatherspoons is the one that's been making news recently because the boss of Weatherspoons said, "Why don't you go work for Tesco?" and basically has not told 40,000 employees how they're getting paid, because obviously no one's going to the pub because they're closed. But then there's all this money. It's a whole thing where it's like measures coming in at certain times, companies making decisions and having to backtrack. It's very interesting seeing everything kind of flying around and how it's affecting things. But yeah, if you told me that even 2 weeks ago, I'd have been like, no way. And it's something we're going to have to be dealing with, not just as a country, but the whole world is going to be paying off this for years to come, because it's a crisis. I mean, that's how, you look back at any crisis in human history and it has a bill attached and it affects the economy for time to come, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is focusing on saving lives and all of that.
Yeah, precisely.
Yes, glad we agree on that point. Yeah, sorry. So then we have the coronavirus legislation. As we mentioned, it's been going through. It's a 329-page emergency bill. It's amazing how much legislation has gone through. And I know that one thing, it used to be Brexit cast. It then became newscast because they were like, well, we've officially Brexited, so we're going to shift this. It's now the coronavirus podcast, I believe. So they've been adapting to this, but they were talking about it in the latest episode. And yeah, the kind of the points they were saying is there's a lot of legislation suddenly happening. So there's bound to be cracks and loopholes and things that people fall through no ill will, but just because if something's been rushed through quickly, there will be flaws in that legislation. But I've posted a summary article from the BBC. They've had a load of rules. So they've allowed retired NHS workers to come back. There's these 405,000 volunteers signing up to help the NHS, like with taking stuff to vulnerable people and so on. There's lots of sections about rules, things like, I mean, it's stuff that the average person might not even stop to think about yet, but they're increasing the use of audio and video links in courts so that not everyone has to be present in the courtroom, which of course is a sensible measure, but like you forget that has to be, for something like that, it's not like us where we can just say we work from home now because the internet exists. Sometimes there are legal reasons why something was previously different, and they just have to. Yeah, the big things we've already touched on. Shutting down pubs, like that's basically going in as a law. So you can now be fined. There's a legal measure if you are a pub owner who does not shut down. There's a whole list. There's the sick pay that we've mentioned. So you can now reclaim statutory sick pay immediately. So there's normally a 3-day waiting period. Most companies that all the companies I think I've worked for have waived that and always done like statutory sick pay from the day you're ill. Or in fact, if they're good companies, have offered me my normal salary for sick days. But yeah, I think there's a lot of people, especially people who may be on kind of worse contracts, because a lot of people who work in an office may not necessarily know that that's how statutory sick pay works for people who are not in an office environment normally. So, there's definitely going to be people who are going to be affected about that. And I think, has that passed at this point? I know today was supposed to be the last day.
I think it must have done. Must have passed. I know it was the last day. So
yeah,
just check. They were talking about it. Also, just a quick side note, is also Jeremy Corbyn's last PMQs today.
Oh. How is the Labour leadership contest going, given all this? I believe people are still voting on it.
Yeah, I think they are. I think to take a quick sidebar here, I think I think Keir Starmer is going to win it. I think that's the perceived wisdom. But I believe events have overtaken it somewhat. And what could have been a bit bigger in the eye of the media has certainly taken a back step. And I assume there won't be a big Labour conference to welcome in the leader. And I assume that they must be having to change their voting methods to either online or by post, because I imagine nobody were doing it in person at the Labour conference. So, yeah, that's as much as I know for now.
I'm just going to mention, while all that legislation and stuff is being mentioned, that there's a very good BBC article I'll put in the show notes called "What?" Well, its full title is "What are the new restrictions and why they needed?" But the actual short title they have on the BBC website is "What is banned and what isn't banned," which a helpful explainer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Going back to Labour Party leadership elections, then we're meant to get the result on April 2nd. So that is creeping up on us. And the latest polls that I've seen from YouGov and from Survation on the 25th of Feb and the 24th of Feb showed Starmer with a final preferences lead of around about 64-66%. So it looks like Starmer will win that one, rather than Rebecca Long-Bailey, who looks to coming in second place, and Long-Bailey was sort of the Corbyn endorsed candidate. So it looks like, at least in the short term, that Corbynism will be put to one side in the Labour Party. I don't think that you can stop a movement like that entirely, and I think those people will stick around, and that Keir Starmer or whoever ends up leading the Labour Party will have to do something to appease that group. But yes, it certainly has. It's taken a back step a little bit. I think we would be getting to the crunch in the contest, but now, I haven't really heard a peep about it for a long while.
Yeah, and not surprising, really. It's kind of fallen by the wayside. I did see some people on Facebook saying today's the day to vote. I don't know. I assume that was done as some kind of postal or online ballot. They were saying today's the day to vote. # person they support. So, yeah, there's definitely, it is one of those things that's kind of fallen by the wayside. But obviously there are people out there who are still invested in that, Labour members who can vote on it. So, I think it's surprising. I suppose I would have thought that would have been our big story about this time of the year, and suddenly it's disappeared. Because, everything is taking a back seat right now, and rightfully so. There's only so much we can say. I suppose the benefit is leaving this as some kind of time capsule of what it was like in the moment, our kind of thoughts and feelings. But I don't think there's much else we can say. Things are changing so quickly that pay attention to the news, pay attention to all of those sources we've mentioned.
Yeah. Stay safe, stay home. Yeah.
Yes.
All of that jazz.
Remain indoors. Do not mention the event.
I've been watching those. They're good. Sorry, they've been.
They're very good. Dark humor. And on YouTube, there is a playlist of all of them, back to back, and it's almost more interesting watched as a small serial as opposed to every week in the middle of a load of other sketches. But yeah, so I suppose we're going to move on quickly to a quick polls update.
Yep.
And I suppose maybe the most that's another thing that's been affected, because I think I've seen a lot of talk back and forth about whether primary votes are going to happen, how they're going to have to be changed, and all of that. How's it going for? Well, I think it was mostly down to Biden and Sanders, wasn't it?
Yes, it was last time we talked, and since then, I think Joe Biden took a key victory in the state of Florida, which really helped his chances. Florida as a key swing state in the election, so winning there is seen as quite important, and it also nabs you a lot of delegates. Having a look at the recent 538 tracker, it puts Biden on a 98% chance of victory, with a 2% charge of no one, and then Sanders and other people who've dropped out have a less than 1% chance of winning the nomination. So it's been a huge swing for Joe Biden, and the more primaries that go ahead, the more he consolidates his lead. Now, a Sanders fan will say, look, there's still a long way to go in this contest, and if Sanders sweeps states, he could be back in it. But the problem is, once you've dropped down to 2, it's very hard for the other candidate to have it's very hard for the person who's in the lead to have an awful night and to lose a lot of delegates. And it's getting to the point now where, even though it's not mathematically impossible, it's more and more improbable for Sanders to get that nomination. So it looks like we're heading for Biden versus Trump in 2020.
Yeah, and I suppose we should go to our normal comparison. I think I've got it higher up. It's not in our actual current chat, but the president general election poll. And this has been staying kind of steady. Just having a quick scan. Back to March 18th. So as long as you don't click show more polls on that first part that loads, currently none of them are going Trump's way. But the margins can be quite small. We're talking, I think the smallest I can see there is... Oh, there's a 50-50 actually. That's the smallest I can show, and that's Sanders versus Trump. But given that Sanders is very unlikely to win, the one you want to look at there is actually Biden versus Trump, where it's a 2% difference, 51 to 49%. But yeah, it does look like at the moment Trump is polling poorly compared to either Democrat.
Yes, there's a lot of there's a lot of ground to go until 2020, and the success of the impact of the coronavirus and the potential impact that has on the economy and how successful Trump is with dealing with that, that could make or break his election chances. We've always said that it's quite hard to really judge an effect. It's very hard to win an election when the economy is in the doldrums. Now, people might understand the reason behind the economy being in the doldrums now. Like we've mentioned, this is a crisis that has a bill and it must be paid, and you'd much rather, have the economy be the one affected rather than people's lives. I'm just having a look at the approval ratings for Donald Trump. In the recent days as well, his approval rating has shot up a little bit, or at least his disapproval rating has gone down from 52 to 50. So it appears that, you do have a sort of rally round the flag effect when you have these crises going on. People just say, look, we've got to get behind the leader and do as they say. So that might have a short-term bump for Donald Trump in the polls, but it's the long tail of this effect, how long it goes on, how well he's able to manage that I think will be one of the defining characteristics when we get to November of this year and see how the campaign goes.
That's actually that's one point I almost raised earlier, and kind of we moved on, and I would like to just touch on that. It is, as you say, in a crisis. So I think it was President Macron in France had a 51% approval rating the other day, and that's almost unheard of for a French president. So the French like to dislike whoever's currently their leader, it seems, and they generally have quite low approval ratings. And you go back to like a year to all the Gilets jaunes protests and all of that, and you wouldn't expect him to be in a strong position. But obviously his reaction to the pandemic has boosted his numbers. And I suppose the question is, what is the tail of that effect? Because in the moment, like we were saying, we've gone from complaining about Boris all the time to saying, well, maybe there's some things we can criticise, but overall, at least he's had a response, etc. And that kind of, it's that changing of the framing of the conversation changes how people think when they vote. But people will likely have forgotten that in, next general election, 5 years' time. It's probably going to be the effects of an economic slump following this crisis that will probably be on people's minds. So it's interesting, it's a temporary boost, but you basically have to have your election in the middle of it, which isn't going to play particularly well, I would imagine. Kind of a last thing, a bit more upbeat. Been ending on a downer far too often, and especially given the current circumstances. I've got a bit of a quiz for you, Rob, that I will post a screenshot of in the show notes if you want to play along at home. I know this has been doing the round on WhatsApp. People may have already seen this, but this is an emoji guessing game of different diseases.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I know, it's good, isn't it? Let me just find it to copy. There we go. So all the answers are illnesses.
Okay, so question one has to be Black Death.
Yep.
Question two, foot and mouth.
Yep.
Question three is TB.
Yep.
Pig, bird, swine flu. At number 4.
Swine flu, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty certain. Yeah.
Yellow fever.
Yep. 6 is the one that I think people struggled with mostly because they just kind of were like,
Pill spare. Pill bowler. Ebola?
Yeah, I think that's the trickiest one because it's just a pill and people are like, oh, I suppose that's supposed to be E. Yeah.
Yep. Chicken pea. Okay, well, I'll come back to 7.
Well, so for reference, that's the water buffalo emoji.
Oh, is that the one at the end?
Yeah, it's because of the
Okay.
dark mode on Discord. Yeah, it
Right.
doesn't. So, with that information, can you guess what that one is?
Oh, it's chicken pea buffalo. That disease.
It's chicken pea buffalo. Yes. There we go. There's the show title.
Cock parking buffalo. What is it?
I suppose it's another name for an animal that looks like buffalo that you're needing.
Bison. The cock parking bison. I'll come back to that one. Number 8 is coronavirus, I assume, because it's being a virus. Thai noodle ID red.
This is the quality content everyone's here for.
What is that one? And the other one is about. Well, this is where my knowledge of diseases. Oh, rubella. Rubella is number 10.
Yeah, that one's quite good.
Yeah.
You're very close. So you've got. What were the 2 you haven't got? There's one that you've kind of intentionally not got.
Number 7 and number 9.
Yeah. I mean, I think number 7, you've essentially joked that you can't get it, but I'm sure you've got it, really.
No, I really haven't. Tell me. I really haven't.
Well, so it's chicken pox.
Oh, damn. No. Poopy.
The other one, I suppose, if you know what that flag is for number 9, you can get it.
It is Thailand, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Thailand, noodle, ID red. Thai.
I mean, I do know the answers, so this helps.
Typhoid.
Yes. Typhoid fever.
Typhoid fever. Okay. I'm upset I didn't get chicken pox. I should
You kind of. I thought you were intentionally joking around the idea that it was chicken pea.
Generally didn't have a clue.
Well, as I say, there'll be a picture of that in the show notes so you can see what Rob was struggling with there.
Dark mode on Discord makes it... That bonus one I haven't got either. Speech.
That your clue here...
Oh, wait a second. I've got it. Is it SARS?
Yes. Your clue here is that the peach emoji is used for another purpose, yes.
And I've got another one from you on your phone. It goes eggplant water emoji, and I'm very confused.
So yeah, I hope that was a bit of levity to add to the end for people to enjoy. Thank you for joining me, as always, Rob. Adding your insight, even if it's an interesting time right now and there's not so much politics going on. It's always good to chat, and it's good to have these online chats at the moment, given the situation as well. So thank you for joining me. Thank you to our listeners for listening. As always, you can find us in all of the usual places we link. You might want to head over to our website to parliamentary.observer/unparliamentary/313 to find the show notes for this episode. And of course, the best thing you can do is subscribe to the podcast, share it far and wide, tell your friends, tell your family. They're stuck inside. They probably need to listen to something. I mean, it's not a funny joke. I'm just saying, podcasts. Some people listen to podcasts on their commute. I listen to them most of the day, so I think I'm probably listening to more podcasts now than I normally do. So if you know there's someone who might be interested in our back catalogue, some of our specials, or even into listening to our more recent episodes, throw them our way. And you can always support us as well at patreon.com/TTSS, where I post all of the show notes, and there's also a patron-only feed of like silly edits and other things that come out from each episode. So yeah, throw us a few dollars and you can throw us a few arbitrary currency units of your choice and you can hear all of those. And with that, there's nothing else to say, I feel, than it's good night from me.
It's a good night from him.
Bye.
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 Hi, have you ever wondered what would happen if you took the schoolyard conversation of which one of my favourite fictional characters would win in a fight? Well, wonder no more. Join me, Chris, and my co-host Matt every other Sunday for Mishmash Mayhem, and you can find out.